science.
Hello there. Long time no see. Welcome back to Nutrition Tips with J-Lo. It's been a few weeks since I made a video, but here we are. I'm excited. And today I want to focus on dialing in your pre-race or pre-interval session nutrition, kind of what that schedule might look like for a race day versus an interval day, kind of an afternoon practice sort of situation, because this is something I think all of us can continue to work on, something that is really important for athletes of all abilities and ages and sports to kind of dial in and perfect a little bit, because it makes a big difference, and it can be a make or break situation if you mess up the timing and what you're eating going into a race or into a hard interval session, and it's going to make the quality suffer a little bit. So I talked about it before, but I want to talk about it again and kind of walk you through a little bit of a schedule for each of those kinds of days, and hopefully help you improve in your nutrition going into race day, into a hard session. So let's go. So up first, we need to talk about refreshing the brain on what to eat before a hard race or workout where we're going to be doing some intensity, skiing hard. And I shared a few weeks ago my little graphic of like crafting your ultimate pre-race breakfast. So kind of the short version of that is you want to keep it simple. I think the key is obviously all of the food and stuff that you've been eating in the days before a race or before a hard workout is going to play a role and be important. And so we always want to make sure that our meals are balanced, we're getting enough food throughout the day, because that's what's really going to help fuel our muscles and have that stored, energy in our muscles to power that. But having a meal a few hours before a hard workout or a race is going to kind of top that off and give us that extra energy to feel good. And so everyone's a little bit different, but really the kind of fundamental equation of this is keeping it simple, so we don't want to eat anything crazy complicated or things that we've never tried before on race day. That's kind of just an essential pro tip right there. We also want it to be pretty high and focused on carbohydrates. Simple foods to kind of eat are things like potatoes, rice, oats, cereals, pasta, smoothies, things like that are just high in carbohydrate, that are going to be easy for you to digest and absorb and use, because that's what the body prefers to use at high intensities. You want to have it be pretty low in fat, because fat takes a little bit longer to digest and empty out of the stomach, which can cause digestive issues and stomach aches and things like that. A little bit of protein, so you want to make sure you still have a good source of protein in there, whether it's some milk or yogurt, some eggs, things like that. And then, of course, pretty low in fiber. I'm a big fiber guy, big fiber fan, but right before a race or a hard workout, it's not a good thing. We want to try to minimize that or avoid that, because it also isn't digestible by us, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of like pass through us, for lack of a better term. So we want to make sure that we are avoiding too much fiber so that we can avoid stomach problems. Okay, so with timing, ideally we want to give our body plenty of time to digest a meal before we start making our way into the pain cave. And so kind of the good rule of thumb is like 2 to 4 hours before your race or hard effort. Like I said, everyone's a little bit different, so this is where you have to experiment yourself and kind of self-tinker, experiment with what works best for you, trying different foods. And this is where it can get tricky, because we all race and train at different times. And so, we're used to probably training at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for our interval sessions, but then maybe you race at 10 a.m. at a qualifier or a race. And so we have to be able to learn how much time we need, what foods are best, and kind of having our go-to meal for just eating and having with us, so we don't even have to think about it, and then you just eat it with 3 hours to go, and that works, and then you can just focus on the race. And so if, let's say you're racing, let's talk about race day, say you're racing at 10 a.m., that means you ideally want to wake up 2 to 3 hours before that race start to be able to eat your breakfast and give it time to digest. And so that means waking up at 7 a.m., Maybe you eat breakfast at 7:15, bowl of oatmeal with some banana, some maple syrup, a little bit of milk, things like that. Classic breakfast. And then you have 3+ hours, 2 to 3 hours of digestion to kind of absorb that to be used as fuel and to not have anything in your stomach. Some people also really like to have maybe like 30 minutes to an hour before a small little snack, but keep this super, super simple. So the closer we get to race start or to workout start, the simpler and more easily digestible we want our food choices to be. So things like blocks and gels and maybe a bite of banana, or even like a small boiled potato or a sip of sports drink or something like that we can just use to kind of like top off those fuel stores, because we're using some of that in our warm up, things like that. For most of your races, it's not massively important to have a crazy amount of fuel on board, but they are intense and they do use a lot of energy. So we want to make sure that we aren't underfueled. Then of course you race 10 a.m. Then you move into kind of like that post-race recovery mode, especially when we're racing back-to-back days. You want to get that recovery going as soon as possible. And that means just basically while you're cooling down, grab a bar or a piece of fruit or a little sandwich that you make ahead of time, or a recovery drink of some sort, and just start eating that, start sipping on that as soon as you can, because that's going to start kickstarting that recovery process and start to replenish those used up energy stores that you are going to want to use for the next day's race. And then you're going to want to have a full-on real meal after that. So if you're racing at 10, you should still have a legit full lunch and then a legit full dinner, because your body still needs to kind of keep topping up those fuel stores, especially if you have a race the next day. Now, it's tricky too if you're racing at, say, noon or 1 p.m., as a lot of times are when there's later races. Maybe you're older and some of the older guys go later. And this is where it can be tricky, because you're used to eating lunch at that time. And so that's why you have to get creative and experiment with what kind of foods you like. And so with that sort of scenario, I would suggest just waking up at a normal time, having your normal breakfast, maybe going for your morning walk or jog before the race, and then having not a full meal, but sort of a lighter meal, or like a bigger snack about 1 to 2 hours before that race. And you have to kind of experiment again, but something like, some white rice with some maple syrup and fruit, or, if you want more savory, you could do some like potatoes and eggs and a little scramble kind of thing, and just have that in the tank a couple hours before the race, and then maybe some blocks or a gel immediately before to kind of top it off. And that way you're not getting behind and you're not starting off that race with kind of low blood sugar and low liver glycogen. Now, if we're talking about a afternoon training session, maybe you're racing at 3 p.m. Training at 3 p.m. We're doing some sort of interval workout. It's still really hard, and there's a lot of intensity there. And you're maybe at school and you're running around. This is where it gets really important, because it can be so easy to start to underfuel or to just forget to eat and not have that sort of pre-race or pre-hard workout meal and have something in the tank. And so I suggest doing the same thing. So kind of counting backwards 2 to 3 hours before you're going to be at practice. So that means kind of lunch. That's why it's so important to have a really solid lunch that has plenty of carbohydrates in it, to be able to have enough energy to get through that session without kind of bonking. Then you can have a little snack on the way to practice, something really simple, some dried fruit, maybe a banana or a bar, something like that. And then you're going to be just so well fueled and have good energy and be able to get the most quality work out of that session. And then same thing, maybe you have a little bar, some sort of trail mix or dried fruit or a recovery drink in your car afterwards. Slam that back, then you're kickstarting that recovery, and then you can go home and have dinner, and you're just kind of continuously moving from meal to meal, snack to snack, and having good fuel, good energy to recover and to train hard. I think that is sort of enough for this. I probably went a little bit too in depth, but I hope that was helpful, and I hope that you can continue to dial this stuff in. This is incredibly important in your career as an athlete, and something that I think a lot of athletes can really work on, and it will really help you feel good and perform and race at your best. Because again, we all know that getting the most out of good quality training sessions, especially those hard interval days, is going to translate into getting the most out of a good race day. And so you want to be able to have that continuity between good nutrition from training day, good nutrition to race day. Talk soon.